Okay. So yeah, I welcome you all to this meetup session in the preparation of our YB Hackathon happening at the early October. And all of you guys who don't enroll already and the people who are watching the recording later, I just ask you to have a look at the YB Hackathon and enroll. We have still capacity. And today we're going to have two sessions. So the first session is brought to you by Amanoc Solutions. It's about introduction to Amazon Web Services. And the second one is about UX design with limited time. I think something you will face in the hackathon. And it's brought to you by DV Bern. And yeah, I think it's no reason to get very longer. I would directly hand over for the first session.
Okay, thank you, Marcel, for the handover. So I'm going to share my screen. And please let me know when you see it.
We do.
Okay, wonderful. So my name is Anda Catalina Kelba. I'm working as a cloud engineer within Amanoc since the beginning of 2020. I have a background in telecommunications, and before I worked as a software engineer at CERN. So I'm looking forward to the hackathon and to see the different teams and to the energy that we're going to have during the weekend. Okay, moving forward, I want to say 2 words about Amanoc Solutions. So we are an IT solution provider with focus on enterprise cloud data center solutions. So we can provide help on what we called private and public cloud solutions. We operate throughout Switzerland and we have the headquarters in Bern. And our clients are from medium-sized companies, enterprise and service providers that are spread across all industries. So this is just to have an idea about who is Amanoc Solutions and what we do. And now we're going to move forward with the agenda of today. So I'm going to do a short intro, and then we're going to discuss about the AWS global infrastructure. Then for today, I chose 3 of the base services available in AWS, which are the VPC, the EC2, and S3. So we're going to see together an overview of these 3 services. And at the end, I'm going to give you some additional information that might be useful for you. So if you have any question, please write a question mark in the chat or write the question directly in the chat. Also, let me know if there are issues with the voice, the video, or the lagging. I hope we're not going to have any troubles during the presentation and nothing that's going to bug. Okay, so let's get started. So we're talking about cloud. And let's start with one of the main advantages of the cloud, which is the agility of cloud computing. And that will be the ability to replace what would initially will have the capital infrastructure expenses with low variable costs that help enterprises to grow their businesses. So traditionally, we'll need to anticipate the costs and to calculate in order to order the needed infrastructure and to put it in place to install it. But now with the cloud computing, we are way more agile to do it, and in a matter of a couple of seconds, a couple of clicks, we can instantly run hundreds or even thousands of servers and deliver results way faster. So with AWS, there is no minimum commitment or no long-term contracts, and it's very helpful to innovate faster nowadays. Next, we are going to see an overview of some of the basic services. So just know that today there are a lot of services, highly reliable, scalable, and low-cost infrastructure. And the services are powered on over 190 countries around the world. So some of the core services that we have are around compute, networking, storage, databases. And today we're going to see an overview about the Amazon EC2, the Amazon VPC, and the Amazon S3. So as I was saying, this is only an overview of basic services, because every year we have more and more announcements that are made and new functionalities and services that are coming up. And for instance, in 2019, we had nearly 2,000 announcements that were made. So you can imagine that it's evolving pretty fast, and we also need to keep up with the new functionalities and services. So today we have more than 5,000 services and functionalities that are offered. These functionalities are grouped into about 200 services. And of course, we can ask ourselves if we need to know all these 200 services or not from the beginning. But to answer this, there is a principle that you might already know that is called the 80-20 principle, or the Pareto law, which says that about 20% of the causes are, so product 80% of the effects. I'm going to reformulate. So about 80% of the effects are the product of 20% of the causes. So meaning that there are about 30 and 40 major services that will be used by almost everyone. So in general, in order to answer 80% of the use cases, we'll need to have a look at only about 30 services. And I think this is an important principle to bear in mind at the beginning, at least. Okay, are there any questions so far?
So we are still here, but no questions.
Okay, thank you. So then we're going to move forward and to see the AWS global infrastructure. So the AWS network is divided into regions which correspond to geographic locations. So each region contains several high availability zones, and each availability zone is designed to be isolated from failures from other availability zones. So in each availability zone, we're going to have multiple data centers that resides, and we don't actually see them. We only have access to these availability zones. And something else that also we have are something that we called points of presence that will be edge locations. So this is also a subject that today we're talking about edge points and how to bring compute power more closely to businesses. So today there are 24 launched regions. So the regions are the ones that you can see in orange. The ones in green, there are 3 announced regions today, which are Spain, Jakarta, and Osaka, I think. And the total will have around 77 availability zones. So this is to give you an overview of the global infrastructure map and to see what AWS built around the world. So of course, as the businesses are growing and the needs also evolve, AWS, they continue to provide new infrastructure at the global level. So More specifically, inside the region, we're going to have at least 2 availability zones. We can ask ourselves why. So this will be because if there is a problem in one availability zone and it fails, then we have a second one that is nearby that can take over the loads by the availability zone that failed. And here we have also an example of two regions with their associated availability zones. So we can see, for example, that in North Virginia today there are 6 availability zones, and Ireland, which is a region in Europe, there are 3 availability zones. So this will be the names that are used inside the AWS services. And when we talk about the availability zones, we're talking about AZ, A, B, C. So that, I think, would be all about the global infrastructure.
Sorry, I can't really write the chat. Teams give me an error message, but is there something in Switzerland?
So in Switzerland, concerning a region, there is no official information. So we don't have an announced region for Switzerland, at least yet. And what we're going to have in Switzerland will be more points of presence, and also something else that will allow, for example, if you want to directly connect to the backbone of the AWS, it is possible from Switzerland directly also.
Okay, so more connectivity things, because it's always a topic with banks and stuff like that to have hosting in Switzerland.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know the banks, but the thing is that from what I know and what I was able to follow concerning this issue, there were some communications. I don't remember exactly the name, but this I can look it up if you're interested and follow with the link afterwards. That was saying we can design actually the architecture inside AWS in order to correspond to the needs of the Swiss banks.
Okay.
But then, of course, we need to have a closer look to evaluate it and to be more careful about the decisions that we take, because it's a, let's say, a particular use case.
Okay.
But
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Okay, then we move forward with the first service that we're going to see, which is about networking. So VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud, which would be a virtual network topology that will closely resemble to what we call a traditional network that you might already have seen or not, or it's something that we can also find in the private data centers. So if with the VPC, you have the control, the complete control over the environment, over the virtual networking environment, and you can easily customize the network configuration for your virtual network, such as selection of IP address range, creation of subnets, configuration of route tables, and network gateways. So AWS, so when you create a VPC, you're going to define also some subnets, and there are unique IDs to each subnet. So regardless the type of the subnet, which we can have to public or private, the internal IP address range of the subnet is always private. Then let's define what we call a private and a public subnet. So a public subnet would be a subnet with a route to the internet gateway, for example, for a web server that is going to be accessible from the internet. And then a private subnet is not going to have a route to an internet gateway, and we're going to use it for a database server only accessed within the VPC. So also each subnet will reside inside one availability zone, and we cannot span it over availability zones. So as I was saying, you can easily customize the network and configuration for the VPC. And here we have an example where we can see that inside the AWS, we have our own VPC, and then we have a public subnet and a private subnet. So in the public are the web servers that are going to be accessible from the internet using an internet gateway. And in a private subnet, we're going to have, we can have our application servers that are only going to be accessible within the VPC. So there's no connection here to the internet. And something else that we can have here will be a VPN. So virtual private network, only subnet that we can interconnect with a private network, for example, if that's needed. And we can leverage AWS functionalities while still having a private cloud. So there are also different layers of security that we can define, which we call security groups and network access control lists. And this will allow us to control the access to through our servers, for example, in each subnet. So that was the overview concerning the VPC. Are there any questions concerning this part? So I guess no. Then we can move forward to the Compute EC2. So EC2 stands for Elastic Compute Cloud, and they are virtualized servers in Amazon's data centers. So what we say is that they are designed to make the web scale computing easier for developers. We have simple web interfaces where we can easily configure the capacity. We can, so we have a complete control of the computing resources, and we can easily configure different parameters. What's also interesting is that the time required to obtain and boot new server instances is quite low, and this help us to be more agile and to quickly scale the capacity based on the computing requirements changements. So this is also interesting, of course, from an economical point of view. And why? Because we are also going to pay only the capacity that we actually use. And then there are different tools that we can use to build what we call failure resilient applications and to isolate applications from common failure scenarios. So we have a true virtual computing environment that we can use to launch instances with a variety of operating systems, to load them with our custom application environments, to manage the network access permissions, and we can also run our own image or choose an image that is proposed in the system. So you can also choose between Linux and Windows. You can programmatically scale the computing capacity based on the requirements. So if you need at one point, for example, to add what we call two instances, which will be maybe in common language to servers, so we can automatically do it, or if we need to reduce them and to stop them, this is also possible. And of course, we can leverage the global infrastructure of AWS that we saw earlier to deploy across different regions and availability zones for reliability. So also being in Europe, we can choose to deploy in the US if we have customers there and we want to be more closely to them. So in order to improve the latency and the throughput, would be more interesting for us to go directly in a region there to deploy near our customers. We also have a wide selection of instance types that are optimized for different use cases and workload requirements. Most are based on Intel Xeon processors, and there are different things that we generally consider before choosing the instance type. So the common questions that we're going to ask ourselves will be, how many cores do we need? What's the memory size that we need? The storage size and the storage type. Maybe we have some network constraints that we need an important network performance. And also, maybe we have an interest on the CPU that is used, as they also propose different CPU technologies. So for the time being, bear in mind that there are different families that are proposed, and of course, you can choose the one that best fits your use case. So this is something that I a little bit already mentioned. By scaling your instances, like adding new ones or deleting existing instances programmatically. And I want to simply explain you how this works, as this is a main advantage that we have with the cloud services. So here we'll have, let's say, monitoring services that we're going to define some rules on it, and based on those rules, we're going to say that, hey, if you reach 80% of the compute capacity and more requests are coming in, then maybe we're going to add new servers so that we're going to be able to provide our services at a good latency to our customers. So then we're going to use a service that is called autoscaling, and this service is going to add new instances that is going to make them available. And then is going to discuss with another server saying, hey, here are your new instances that I created. Please take them into account. And when you have new requests coming in, also distribute these requests to the new instances. So also is elastic load balancing. So it's balancing the load that's coming in. And then the load balancer will report some metrics also to the monitoring service. And then we start again the loop on, and if needed, we create new servers, or in the same way, if we say, hey, now we're only using 20% of our computing capacity and we have maybe 10 servers, is it possible maybe to shut down 5 of them? Okay, then autoscaling, please shut down 5 instances, and then this service is going to talk to the other one saying, hey, these 5 instances are not longer available, so please don't take them into account. And that's how it's working. So if you have any questions concerning this, please ask them. Might be a little bit tricky at the beginning, but once we get how it's working, it's quite simple. Okay, If no, we're moving forward. And we're going to talk about an object storage service, which is called S3, and it stands for Simple Storage Service. So this is designed to make the web scale computing easier for developers. So it provides a simple web service interface that can be used to store and to retrieve any amount of data at any time from anywhere on the web. So it gives access to everybody to the same highly scalable, reliable, secure, what we call fast, inexpensive infrastructure already existing that Amazon uses to run its own global network of websites. So there are some facts about the S3 service. So you can store a limited number of objects in what we call a bucket. And there is actually a limit of 100 buckets per account, per AWS account. So the size of an object can be up to 5 terabytes, but there is no limit to the size of a bucket. This service, S3, so it's designed for what we call the 11 nines of durability. So this would be 99.9999. So 11 nines. And 99.99% of availability of objects over a given year. We can use both HTTP or HTTPS endpoints to store and to retrieve any amount of data at any time, anywhere on the web. So the most important, what maybe you need to stay with, is that S3 is highly scalable, reliable, fast, and inexpensive. So it's widely used. It's a widely used service, and there are different common use cases for this service. So we can use for storage and backup, file hosting, software delivery. So for example, we can host a static website on Amazon S3. So we were going to configure a bucket for the web hosting, and then we're just uploading our content to the website, our website content to the bucket. So this is pretty useful. If you have only a static website, just know that you can use S3, and you don't need an EC2 instance, a server to upload your content. Okay, are there any questions by this point, as we had an overview of these 3 services? Okay.
Pretty clear to me, thanks.
Okay. Then I'll give you some additional information, which I think is pretty useful when starting with AWS services. As we saw, there are different functionalities and services available, we can consider that it's a complex software. We can, of course, ask ourselves how we're going to be able to estimate the costs, because we saw that we have different instance types. There are also different sizes. We can choose between the CPU. So of course, the prices are different based on everything. So for this, we have the simple monthly calculator, which is pretty useful if you want to estimate how much your architecture is going to cost, or even for a personal project, for maybe a personal website that you want to put in there. I have friends that they do video game streaming, and they host their video games on AWS during the stream. So this is a useful tool to estimate how much is going to cost you if you want to use the services. And of course, as you can see here, per service, you can add exactly the features that you want to use. And then he's going based on, of course, on the region also, he's going to, at the end, to sum up everything and give you a number. This is something more interesting when you have a project that you want to build on AWS and the project is evolving. Maybe at the beginning, you might have, for example, something that is stored on some server somewhere and you would like to store in AWS. The first step would be to do what we call a lift and shift. So you just take your application as is designed and you put it on AWS. You transpose it to a public cloud. And then once on AWS, what we usually do is to choose the right sizing of the instance to improve the elasticity, to monitor as we saw and to measure, to optimize, and we do a lot of optimization. And then it takes some way to get to be true AWS optimized. As we saw, so optimization, it's something that it's important and it's a long-term ongoing process. And here we have some powerful drivers that help us to achieve the cost optimization. The first one is the instance right sizing. So this would be to select the cheapest instance available while, of course, meeting the performance requirements. So we'll need to look at the CPU, we'll need to look at the memory, at the storage, at the network to identify which is the best instance that I can use and maybe what I can downsize also. The second point would be to purchase what we call reserved instances. So know that on AWS, you can use the services on demand, as I already told. You just request them and they are made available to you immediately. Or you can also reserve instances. And as there are different types and sizes of instances, it's interesting to reserve instances in advance as they really offer great prices. The third one would be to increase what we call the elasticity. So the elasticity is using an instance when you need it and turning it off when you don't, as we saw in the example with the load balancer. So this is one of the most important tenets of the cloud. And often we go through a learning process to operationalize this work to drive cost savings. And when we combine these factors with the fourth ability, that is to measure and monitor, we are able to achieve the cost optimization. Okay. Something more different. So if you want to do something on AWS, first, you might check it on the marketplace. So know that there is an AWS marketplace and chances are that it already exists. So bear in mind, AWS marketplace, it's a great place to have a look to see if you can find what you're looking for. Now, yes.
What are typical examples of what you mentioned now from the marketplace?
For example, if you want a WordPress website, If you want a specific AMI, it might be already there, and you don't need to build your own AMI. Would be let's say server image.
Mm-hmm. Okay, stuff
and
like that.
Yes, and some other stuff. Yeah. Okay. So now I want to show you a simple architecture that includes AWS services. So there are going to be more services than we saw today, but you're going to see that it's quite simple to understand it. So yeah, I have my pointer. So here we can see that inside the region, we have our own VPC, own virtual network, and we are using subnets in 2 availability zones. So we have public subnets, and then what we call the application and data subnets, which are the private ones. So here we see that the customers are going through a DNS, and then we can have a service that is just going to be located closer to the customers at the points of presence, for example, at edge locations, and then is going to communicate with our services in our architecture. We talked a little bit about the auto-scaling of the instances. So if we need more instances here, we can add new instances. Or if we already have like 5 instances and we see that we are using too many instances, we can shut them down. Yes, so this is an example of so it's a WordPress architecture. If you have some questions about it, of course, there are some services we didn't talk about them. Maybe from the names, it's easy to understand what they do, but I think what's important is just to have it as an overview of what an architecture might look like. Yeah. Okay. So before finishing, I want to say 2 words about certifications and available resources. So know that there are different levels of certification, starting with the cloud practitioner that is accessible to anyone who has little or some interest in the cloud computing. And then it depends, of course, on the knowledge and on your career plan. So if you're a developer, maybe you would like to pass the developer associate, and then the next step would be to the DevOps engineer certification, which is a professional one. Or if you're more interested in solution architecting, this one would be better. And then here we have some specialities. If you're interested in machine learning, which is a hot topic nowadays, there is also a certification that can help you gain the needed knowledge about the machine learning services on AWS. And there are some others. So there is, here are some links if you want to prepare for some certifications. Of course, there are trainings available. You can find some free trainings, but also some, of course, trainings that you need to pay for. And then here I put some links. So know that at the beginning, when you create an AWS account, you can use what is called AWS free usage tier during 1 year. So you'll be able to play around with AWS services within some limits, of course, without paying. So I think it's pretty interesting because it allows us to gain some experience and we don't need to invest some money. Then you can find some free labs. At Ammonox, we have our own academy, and we organize some boot camps that are free. And I think there are some boot camps. One infrastructure as code boot camp that is coming up. I need to check exactly the date, but it's a free event. You just need to sign in and to go there, and we can have a talk also with the experts from our team. And then re:Invent, it's the AWS global conference happening once a year in Las Vegas. So this year, of course, there's a lot of events. They are going virtual. So if you're interested, you can have a look this year from your couch. It's happening in December. And that will be all from my side. Do you have any further questions?
Not from my side.
Okay. But even afterwards, if you have some questions that come into your mind, please feel free to contact me. I'll put my email in the chat box. Okay. Then that will be all.
Then I would like to thank you for the session. It was very interesting for me. From where I'm coming from, it's more the Azure part of cloud I know. So it was very interesting to get an insight into the AWS world. Any questions from the audience? Okay, if not, then thank you again. And I would hand over to Michael Schmidt for our next session.
Thank you, Marcel. And then I will share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. Then welcome to the second webinar of tonight for UX design with limited time. Let's dive right into the goals of this webinar. That first would be to get everybody at on the same level. I want to tell you about some basics of UX design. Then the main topic would be the UX process for a hackathon when you have this limited time. And throughout the webinar, I link some different tools, resources, or methodics. And at the end, I also will provide a short overview of some tools and resources you can use at the hackathon. For the agenda, first a quick introduction about myself, and then quick the basics about what's exactly UX and the general UX process. And then the main part, the adaptation of the UX process for a hackathon. At the end, the overview of the tools and resources, and then also the question and answers. So if you have any question during the webinar, if possible, save it until the end for the sake of the recording. Or if you really have any urgent questions, then ask them in the chat, but if possible, wait until the end and maybe write down the slide number if you have a question about the specific slide. Quick introduction about me. My name is Michael Schmidt. I come from the application engineering side. I made my apprenticeship at the Swiss Railway Company. Then after the apprenticeship, I switched to the UX topic and learned for about 2 years all the different side of UX, from research to UX design, also UI design. Then I took a quick dive into a small web agency in Bern called Novu. I worked there as a front-end engineer, especially for Angular, worked with Angular PHP, and also designed most of the projects myself. And since early 2018, I'm now at Devo Bern as a UX designer, and I'm doing a bunch of different projects there. Let's get into what exactly is UX. A lot of time UX is compared to UI, but actually this is are two pretty different topics. At a UX, we're looking about getting information about the user with user research. So get comfortable with who is using our products, what are their motivation, frustrations, and get everything know about that. Then the wireframing or prototyping process is about to have all the insights we have about the user put into a design we can also test. So the main design topic in UX is called interaction design, where we focus about how something will be used rather than how it looks. And also the information architecture, so how a site is built up and how the different screens are connected to each other is a main point we look into in UX. And at the end, one of the most important topics is the usability testing, where we test with the actual users how exactly does our prototype or wireframing work. On the other side, the UI is more about the visual aspects and the visual design, like also branding from the company, different color concepts, typography concepts, or also the style guide, which is mostly then the drop-off for the developers to know how they are developing stuff. One of my most favorite examples are the ticketing system of most railway companies are rather bad or complex in the usage and also mostly doesn't look that good. So the UX would be have to make this more usable, look into who are using those ticketing system, what is the pain points, what is good, and optimize the usage, while the UI is more looking into how we brand this and how should it look good. So UX is about the skeleton and structure of a website, and the UI is more like the makeup side or the visual side of a product. The UX design process itself is defined very, it has a huge variety of definitions how the UX design process is used. One of the most used definition comes from the Stanford Design School, and it consists about 5 different phases. I will quickly go over those. At the start, we have the empathize phase, which is you have to do all the user research. Which user are we going to provide our project, and also take in action the what is the business goal of the client we are working for, and everything. We try to hoard all the information that we can find about all about the project. And then in the second phase, which is closely linked to the empathize phase, the define phase, is we define the relevant information we found in like personas. So we create fictitious persons based on the research data we found about the actual users. Then some roles we have to take into account by the client, some challenges, we define pain points and also milestones that we try to achieve. And then comes the phase, the most favorite phase of the most designers, the ideative phase. There you share the ideas with all the teammates that you have about the project. You create as much different solutions as possible. You open up and you try to get all different possible ideas into account. And then in the prototype phase, we take the best ideas and get them into prototypes, which we at the end can test with the actual users. The main goal about this process is to fail fast and cheap. And it's about failing because what's most important in this process is to get all the bad ideas out. And that's why it's also a iteration. So after the testing phase, and you have all the insights from the testing with the user, you know what works and especially what doesn't work. And about what doesn't work, you have to look up how you can make it better than that. So you go back to the empathize phase, and with each iteration it gets faster and the result will always be better for each iteration. In a normal project, mostly for one problem that we try to solve with the design process, it takes about two or three iterations until you have a really good result. The more the better, but it also isn't quite free to do this. Now at the Devo Bern, we have some adaptations made to it, or I try to translate it in 10 different steps, which I want to present you quickly, and then an adaptation of that for the hackathon. At the Devo Bern, we also always start with research. Almost any role or any company always starts with research. It's about to create a base, understand the client, understand the user, explore all the different stuff that was already made online, do your own research and conduct own user interviews and everything. There is combined the empathize phase and also the define phase. So at the end of the research phase, you already have defined all the key insight points you have about the user and also about all the roles, all the challenges and pain points. Then based on those information we gathered, I create the information architecture from defining all the possible screens that are relevant to this project, then connecting each screen to each other and rate all the content that has to go. If we always listen to all the business side of every project, every website would be filled with information, but mostly we see the more you put on a website or the more you put on any application, the less the user actually sees. So the rating of the content is always very important because there are different voices from the user who want which information, the business who want to put up any information possible, and then you have to find the middle ground. Then comes the wireframe ideation. Wireframe is mostly a phase where you sketch the first draft of any screen. There it's important to open up, explore every possible layout option, and one important point there is that you also have to sketch ridiculous ideas, something you think, I never want to develop this, but it's important for the creativity process to get everything out of your head and just experiment. Here you can create ideas very fast and cheap, so do it. Then a little step that I don't always really use, just in very complex session, is the UX flow. There you connect all the wireframes you have created to create a flow, how the user gets through your application that you just sketched. If you have about 5 or 10 different screens, this isn't really an important step. But if you have a very complex application that we have a lot in Devo Bern, then it's quite good to have a UX flow to get an overview about the whole picture for the whole team that everybody can get aboard. Then the next 4 steps are pretty close together. So there is not really a step-by-step flow, but rather depending on the situation, you will create a UI design. As I said earlier, I also do the UI side of the design process. So in the UX design process in Devo Bern AG, I also include the UI design. There's mostly considered the corporate identity to get into the system, and maybe one of the most points that I have to consider is make it beautiful or make it state of the art and everything like that, and then build up a system that works like that. Then the prototyping phase, you can make the prototype either of the wireframe. So with your sketches, there are a lot of apps that allow you to create a clickable prototype from sketches you made, or then create a prototype based on your UI design, which then looks quite close to the end product. There is also, it really depends on which time in the project you are doing this. Like against the end of a project, I like to test with an actual high fidelity prototype with a fleshed out UI design, because it's then we can really test quickly before it gets into development if the concept still works. The design system is something that grow the last couple of years into importance. Most of you maybe know the term style guide, where you can see all the typography specs, color specs, and maybe some little CSS snippets. The design system includes a style guide, but also include a documentation about how the animation of a system works. Often, especially with Angular or React, you can provide whole components that the developer just can copy out. And it's just a single source of truth for everybody involved, for every designer, developer, and also the client or project lead. Know in the design system are always the latest specs about the visual appearance and how the system or project should work. Then I already talked a little about this. The animation, it also is specified inside the design systems. Most of the people who think about animations in applications, they always think about flashy and blinking stuff. But in the UX process, it's we use animations not to make look things pretty, but to make the design more understandable and explainable. A quick example for good animations are pop-ups, for example, or modals which appear. If they appear without any animation, then even especially if those models are full screen, the user doesn't really know where it come from, where he is now in the application. And with animations, you can explain what actually happens now in the application. Then the most important phase beside the research is the usability testing. Take your prototype, test with actual users, and by actual users, I can't stress this enough. CEOs, developers, UX designers, project leaders, everybody who is closely involved with a project aren't actual users. Even if some of the clients who are you're working with in a project actually uses the end application, isn't actual user you are looking for here, because he is too involved in the project. You search for unbiased and honest feedback of users actually using the application for the first time. So it's really, really important to get actual users into your testing and not just use anybody in the project itself. And with the usability testing, you have really good base feedback for further steps. So if you give all the steps, then with the developer handoff, if you give everything to the designer, then you can be sure if he develops it, the possibility is very high that it will work for the user. And this is the 10-step system. It always depends on the size of the project, on the time budget or also money budget, which step comes into play and how long you can use any, how much time you can have on each step. Now I want to go into the main point of this webinar and look into which steps would be usable in a hackathon. First, the research is always important to get to know about for whom you are going to develop something. So understand the client. Even if you only have a small description of a challenge, think about who would be a possible user, assume a demographic type, and then explore how they behave, what are their potential targets or frustration and motivations. Also here, gather as much information as you can and quickly, and discuss it with the team members. Then the second step is rather a small step, the information architecture. The first step there isn't really important on a hackathon, the linking of the different screens, because in 24 hours you don't have that much time to develop 20 screens, or I don't know. It's more important that you can rate the content and build up the screen, where to put what information and also why. Then probably the most important step for a hackathon is the wireframe. I'm going to explain to you what paper and pen wireframing is and what creativity methods you can use to get quickly results in wireframing and designs, which you can then go into development with a good base strategy of how your project will look. The UX flow won't be any beneficial because the application won't be big enough in a 24-hour development process, but the UI design as well, a visual concept, won't be really possible to develop. So rather look up the corporate identity, how should your application looks like, or use a framework, a front-end framework where already create UI, and I give you some tools that you can generate a pleasing color scheme. For example, you can take the yellow from eBay and then generate a good color scheme out of just one color. Then the prototyping phase is obsolete because your end product is a prototype. A design system is not in the scope of a hackathon. Maybe generate a style guide for future uses after a hackathon, but more isn't really in place. The animations, I would just use the basic animations provided by the platform you are developing for, or also some frameworks already have pre-made out of the box animations, but for an actual animation concept, there probably won't be enough time. Then a step, usability testing, which gets often forgotten in a such small period of time. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure if it's going to work in this short period of time. But there are a lot of different ways to conduct such testing. And one of those I will show you later on is the guerrilla testing. Or you can just test quickly with other participants of the hackathon, or also go out on the streets and test with random persons. Quite near is a shopping center where also different coffee shops are, where you can find potential participants. Then the developer handoff, yeah, that's not really useful because you are all developers. So let's dive into each single step, which I try to explain to you a hands-on plan, which you can maybe print out and then write to it on the hackathon. For the design research, one of the team members could firstly list the target audience on a sheet of paper. A target audience, you just have to get some demographic information about them. For example, our main target audience is male, 30 to 50 years old. It's sportive, mainly uses, for example, the Android end device or something like that. Write them down, and if you don't know any further, go to the second step, which go to a social media of yours or maybe a WhatsApp group, ask for candidates of that demographic. Go, for example, on Facebook or Twitter, ask, hey, I'm doing a research, doing some research, need to chat with the target demographic that you have for 10 minutes. Is anyone available? If you already know someone in your WhatsApp contact list that fits the target demographic, hit them up, look if they are willing to participate in the test. While you wait for possible answers, then prepare a sheet with questions what you want to ask. Usually the topics that you want to get covered are the expectation of this target demographic, the motivations and frustrations with using any kind of application in this manner. And one of my personal favorite question is when I have limited time, I ask about similar products they are using, like the one that I want to design. And then I have quick insights what they like and especially what they don't like. So I have the first numbers that I can work with for my design decisions. Then after some time, if you get some answers on social media or WhatsApp, then you can do the interviews remotely. Mostly over the phone is enough. So the time consumption here really depends on how many people that you could reach. And if nobody answered to your question, or you are not willing to put something on social media or WhatsApp, then you can ask around the hackathon, or at the end, I show you the guerrilla usability testing that you could also use in a user research. After you have some insights, identify the key insights. Key insights are mostly those values you want to have to keep in mind over the whole period of your project or over the whole hackathon. Key insights are mostly identified by when most of the people say the same thing. So it's mostly important to them, or you can also identify the key insights with the results you have from your interview with a secondary research. A secondary user research is every user research in general what others already did, so what you find in the internet. For that, you can also use this if you don't want to talk in person with anyone, even though I highly recommend it. But if you don't want to talk to anyone, then you can just go to the internet, put in the target audience and see what Google gives you. Another way beside Google is the website of the Nielsen Norman Group, or called NN Group, which has a lot of great UX research articles free for use and sometimes also really in-depth. I'm going to link this website later on in the resources. Continue the secondary research. Another one of your team could do the secondary research, but not especially about the user, but of different topics, like the specific domain you are going to make a product out, the context, and general heuristics, how people are using a smartphone, for example, and everything like that. Define the topics you want to find, take about 1 hour of time and really look through everything you find online, from books, case studies, forums, also question and answer boards. There are a lot of great stuff. If you find one information about the topic, always make sure to find at least one other source of information, which then you can be sure that it's probably right, because yeah, everybody can write something in the internet, so it's not always sure if it's right. Do your research, make double checks of your findings. Then based on everything you found, create an assumption which suits your projects and list them off. One of the most important things you have to keep in mind is most of the research done online about UX or web stuff in general is mostly conducted in the United States, or in Europe, it's mostly the UK, or the closest to us is also Germany. But in Switzerland, there are really little research done. So always keep that in mind when you create assumption for your project. I talk quickly about the heuristic evaluation. A short explanation what heuristics examples are. It's general assumption for regardless of any target audience or age or whatever. It's just basic assumption how a person uses something. For example, a hamburger menu on any mobile application should be placed on the right hand side, because most people are most people are right-hand users, and then it's easier to reach. This is an example of a heuristic statistic. One of my most recommendation would be the 10 usability heuristic for UI design by Jacob Nielsen. That's one of the founder of the Norman Nielsen group I talked about earlier. So a quick summary here. Summarize all the key insights you have from the primary and secondary research and make those key insights easy to access for the whole team. So maybe write it on a big piece of paper, write it on Post-it, stick it to your screen, just to have some key insights always in your mind. About my assumption how long that would take if one team member does the primary research and the other does the secondary research, you should be complete about in 1 hour and 30 minutes, which should be suitable on a hackathon. The second and quick step would be the information architecture. There is, with the research in mind, you just have done, write down all the possible screens you want to do in your hackathon. Think about how the content is structured on all those screens. Try to rate the content, how you want to build up, and then also prioritizing all your screens can be beneficial if you get short in time for the development to know which screen you ultimately don't want to develop and which one you are going to develop. Then we come to the main phase, the wireframes. And
Michael,
yep.
Sorry, have you intentionally stopped sharing?
Nope.
At least I lost your sharing, and I wrote you, but I didn't want to interrupt. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the information. Do you see it again?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry for that. Yeah, maybe just quick about the information architecture. The things I talked about, I just wrote them down, nothing more than that. I also will provide a handout of the slides so you could read this afterwards. Then to the wireframes and especially to the creative development of or a creativity method you can use with your team would be the pen and paper prototyping. So prepare 5 sheets or devices on a paper for each participating team member and a pen and a 1-minute timer. A device on paper, I mean printable mock-ups, like you have a piece of paper with already drawn smartphone, so you always have the spacing right. This can be for free downloaded at uiprint.co. Then with all those prepared, you can declare a screen, for example, a dashboard. Then every participant has 1 minute time to sketch this screen with pen and paper. After 1 minute, you take away that piece of paper and take a fresh one and sketch again for 1 minute. Try to sketch a different layout than before. Do this until everybody has 5 different screens sketched. It's really important that you try as many different layouts as possible. It doesn't matter if a layout doesn't make sense, and you don't have to draw details. That's why you only have 1 minute time. You just have to write, sketch down what comes into your mind, and don't worry about if anything makes sense or not. Then present to your team each step, each sketch, and talk about what you thought about it. And again here, if any sketch doesn't make sense, still present it to your team members. Maybe someone can get an idea out of this, and if not, then all have a good laugh, and that's also fine in my opinion. Then at the end, group similar sketches and vote for the top 3. So if everybody, mostly for a dashboard, for example, most of the people in 5 different sketches will draw at least one time the same thing. Group those and vote for the top 3. So at the end, for each screen, you have 3 different possible layouts. Then we go to the detail phase. declare again a screen, for example, again, the dashboard. Keep in mind those top 3 you declared of the layout, and now sketch again from scratch. But now you have 5 minutes time, and now you can get more into these detail. After those 5 minutes, pass the paper to your team member on the right, so you get the sketch from your team member on the left. Continue now the sketch of your colleague, but only for 4 minutes, and then pass it over again, and then sketch again for 3 minutes, and so on. Continue this cycle until you have your own starting sketch again in front of you, or if everybody says I'm out of ideas or the sketch is finished, then it doesn't matter if you pass it more. Then after this round is finished, present your sketch to the team, and after everybody presented their sketch, vote for the best. And this sketch is your final wireframe and design idea for the screen for the rest of the hackathon. And now continue this until you have for each declared screen a wireframe, which you can all base all the decision you do from now on. You can base on this sketch, and you have a visual guideline on how to develop, which should speed up the development itself as well. A little tip on detailing a wireframe. It's also very practical if you use some colors to highlight something like a banner or a button. Important here, the usage of color is not to make something more pretty, but to stand out something that is very important that the user sees. So in the development phase, you also know you have to give special attention to this detail. Then we come quickly to UI design. As I explained earlier, there won't be enough time to develop a whole concept. So use what already exists, and I have some different tips for you. For example, for choosing a front-end framework, the classic always is Bootstrap. It's the base design is quite okay. You can use it in a lot of different ways. Then the materialized front-end framework is rather a bulky front-end framework which displays the material design, which is very well thought through by Google. Also, quick choose, which I like to recommend, is the semantic UI. It's very flexible, very small, and you can do a lot about this in a short period of time. And if you maybe develop with React, then one of my recommendation would be the UI kit in combination with Evergreen. That's the best possible UI and UX solution out of the box. If you implement both, you already have a very good looking application. If you want color schemes on colors smoothly, there are a lot of great color schemes to choose from, and my personal favorite is mycolor.space. You can input one color and get different great color schemes based on that color. For icons or also icon font, the classic here again is Font Awesome. It has all the basic icons you probably need. If you want to have more versatile icons, the material design icons are just as great. And a little special icon set are cartoonish icons. For example, if you want to develop something for children, or if you just want to have it a sketchy or cartoonish look, then the captain icons are really, really good and fleshed out. Then for the fonts, I just would go with Google Fonts. Probably everybody knows that. Quick, a lot of different fonts and quick implemented. If you want some creative font pairing, let's say a serif font as a title, sans serif for the content, then fontpair.co has great font pairing examples based on Google Fonts. For inspiration, I won't get into detail of every link here. As I said earlier, I'm going to provide you the presentation. Here are just some of the websites I regularly use if I need some inspiration to create something. Then to the last point, the usability testing. I'm going to present, firstly, about why I still think the usability testing is a great idea on a hackathon, is to be confident about what works and what not, especially that can support your design decisions in the final presentation. When you present your product, you already have some base to argue about that it actually works. You also can already test with wireframes. Take your piece of paper, maybe go to some other team that have a different chose a different challenge, and just look what they think about it. Give them a task and look if they could solve it based on your sketch. Or at the end of the development phase, you can always test with your prototype. It's best to try to test with 5 different users. That's just a rule of thumb. It's nothing that you have to follow strictly, but a lot of different research shows that you have the best value for your effort with 5 users. The more, the better, but after 5 users, you hear more and more the same feedback. So the time you put into is less and less valuable. And with less than 5 users, you are more prone to opinion-based things from just one person, which maybe doesn't represent the whole user base you are going to design for. And another important thing, and that's why I say that nobody who is involved in closely involved in project is an actual user. Don't underestimate the technological savviness of user. That means user, you don't really use computers, or rarely using computers, are use an application completely different than people who are work with computers, especially if you test with other participants of the hackathon. You are all developers, you all know the computer very, very well. So it maybe doesn't really represent for whom you are designing and developing for. And then, as I said, you can test with other participants or do a guerrilla usability test. What that exactly is, I'm going to explaining now. A guerrilla usability test is a usability test you can do very, very quickly and get feedback very quickly. But in every single usability test, doesn't matter which case, the most important step is write down a scenario. In a scenario, the most important thing is to write it down as neutral as possible. For example, you don't have to write down, now you have to click there and there. Just write it like sign in, or to add a item to the cart. So don't make a manual. Just say what they have to do, and they need to find out for themselves how to use the application. Then the test for itself. First, go out and approach a person. As I already said before, quite near there is a shopping mall with some coffee shops and a lot of people there, especially on a weekend. And then you can go to someone and introduce yourself and ask if they would like to participate with the test. If they agree, get some basic demographics like the age range and how often they use a smartphone or something like that. Then give them this scenario you developed, and what I like to say them is that the product is tested and not them. A lot of them get ashamed when they make an error or doesn't really get the application. It's really important important to comfort them that they are not being tested. So if they make an error, it's the error by the application and not them. Then observe the interaction, their interaction with the prototype, and very important in this phase is ask them to think aloud, that you know what goes through their minds, and don't talk through the test. Don't answer questions of them and don't help them. If they fail to do a task, then it's a problem by the application, and if you help them, then it's faking the test. At the end, ask about their experience in general and thank them for their participation. Maybe if you are in a coffee shop, buy them a coffee or something like that as a reward for participating. Repeat this after you have this magic number of 5 people, approximately. Summarize your findings, and then you have a really great base for the arguments on the presentation itself. For the best test person on a guerrilla test when you are out in the shopping mall, for example, is find the perfect demographic person can be hard. In general, make an assumption it would fit into your demographic profile, and try to approach people who have a coffee or reading or maybe talking to someone, but don't bother anyone who's eating or is busy at general. You mostly see in which mood a person is pretty quickly, so only approach persons you think they would like to participate. Now we come to the end about some tools and resources. I don't really go step by step through them. You can maybe download some of those tools in front and maybe click around. One of the major plus points of a hackathon, it only takes 24 hours. So each premium tool which have a trial works just fine for a hackathon. There are some tools I use for the wireframes or also make some brainstorming visual. And the other are just for a design, or also at the end for the development, for designs or guidelines were already made. And one quick note here, the UX Stack Exchange, every developer knows Stack Overflow. It exists also for UX with just as great answers to a lot of questions. It's just not that active. So I'm around at the hackathon, try to help everybody if they have question about UX or something like that. But if I'm not around, you can always use also this Stack Exchange. I highly recommend it. Then we are at the end of this webinar. If any question appeared during the webinar, you can gladly ask them now.
Thanks for the webinar. It was very, very interesting. I don't think that I have any questions so far for the exactly for the UX or the UI. It was quite clear, every step that you explained. Okay, perfect. Happy to hear. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me prior to the hackathon or also afterwards over the mail. And yeah, have fun hacking. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I have a question about the hackathon. Can I ask it now, or I still need to wait till the hackathon things? It's just my first hackathon. That's why I'm not quite sure if I really fit for the participating, or should I fit myself more? As I understood, it is about the cloud computing and something like web design, and does this all this together.
Okay. Yeah. Well, maybe we take that out of the webinars and discuss it afterwards. I will have time, and then we could also switch to German if it's easier. Okay. So I would like to thank you both for the presentations. Very interesting, both of them. And everyone who will have a look at the recordings, I again invite to have a look at the YB Hackathon homepage. And yeah, if not registered, register. And yeah, if that is so far, I would stop the recording now